Joseph Campbell published The Hero with a Thousand Faces in 1949, and Yuval Noah Harari his book Homo Deus in 2017. I think it's worth taking some time to compare the conclusions of each of them, even though they are that distant in time. First, let's revisit some definitions and their creators from Campbell's most famous work on heroic monomyths. This excerpt is from the epilogue of The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Some define myth as primitive fumbling to explain the natural world, others as poetical fantasy of prehistoric times, still others as allegories or symbols for instruction of the individual, or as an archetype, or as a traditional means of metaphysical insights, or as God's revelation to his children. All of these are definitions of myth. If one cuts oneself off from the mythic stories, one is cut off from the true meaning of life. Rituals translate that we are not alone, but are part of timeless forms that have essential lessons for us and our group. We put ourselves in accord with the cycle of life, the harvest, the rites of cold and death unto spring. We organize our homes and temples around this knowledge, and these stories help us from the time we're born up until we die, and as we transition through all stages in between. But now humans have matured, according to Campbell. Tradition no longer binds societies together as groups. The community is the whole planet. Note him speaking after World War II. The whole planet, indeed, is a battlefield. Before we look to the heavens and nature for our data, but today we look to machines to help us interpret the world. Our devices of the digital age give us our meaning. Our grand questions get answered. But the mystery is still us. We have descended from looking outside to looking inside. We no longer find our answers outside, but now inside in our own personal despair. What if it doesn't mean anything and we can't find the meaning where we're supposed to find it anymore? If we look at what Campbell wrote in the post-World War II era and what Harari published in 2017, we have to ask ourselves a few questions. Are they talking about the same thing? What do you think about the ideas expressed by each author nearly 70 years apart? And where are we currently at in terms of the role of myth in contemporary societies? Here are the two quotes that we've already considered. Read them and compare them. Pause it here if you like and get up close to the screen. I have argued throughout these presentations that myths are stories that lead to predictable actions, rites, and rituals, and they form our reasons for organizing ourselves into groups and cultures. Religions are comprised of myths and establish our way of seeing life and all that it means. But religions are not the same as myths. They can reenact them, but once again, they represent our way of understanding those transcendent mysteries and those difficult grand question answers. What happens when the people lose their religion? And what is the future of myth? We have considered Game of Thrones, which represents a fictional mythic structure that explains and justifies the mythic conflicts in George Martin's fictional world. But it's not too far off from what we know of myth and can readily recognize. Star Wars gives us another fictional account of the Force and good and evil. Both of these, although perhaps a long time ago and far away, can be our future, just as the Marvel Universe can help us understand how we could become greater and more super. Consider the conflict. The chosen ones of myth and the dyadic struggles. And perhaps the ideal, which can easily go wrong, no matter what the intention. And so this so-called fourth industrial revolution, the digital revolution, can give way to Harari's data is religion. And the jobs of tomorrow don't exist today, nor do the myths that will have to answer the questions that don't exist today yet, because we have not yet imagined them. What does it mean then to be genetically altered so you can breathe the atmosphere of Mars? Are you still human? What if you opt for the superhuman strength arm or the superhuman heart replacement? Are you still human? At what point do you exceed your natural humanness and become that superhuman? Maybe our current day myths are not prepared to answer those questions, even though they've served us, some of us, pretty well up to now. And what about the new grand questions that we haven't thought of yet? Will we look to the stars, sacred scripture, our own true inner voice, or to the algorithm for the unasked as of yet answers to those questions? Where do you prefer to look? All I can really predict is that those future grand questions are not mine. They're a young person's game. The future myths are no longer mine to tell. And the mythic stories that Campbell says unify us through time and space will be another generation superpower. That will be dangerous when used for ill and very influential when used for good. I suggest using these stories for good only. The next presentation will close out our topic of myths, past, present, and future, and tie up loose ends.